Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. I am Pasta Jardula, and Jonny Sue is spinning on the ones and twos. And today we have a special show, an important show. I couldn't wait to do this show. Today we have with us a longtime election transparency activist from Arizona who specializes in electronic voting machine security and hacking issues as well. He is the co-founder of Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, and Transparency, also known as Audit USA. Everybody, welcome my friend, John Robert Brakey. How you doing, buddy?
Very good, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Been watching some of the other things you've been covering. A lot of good things in elections. I'm so glad to be here with you.
You know what? I'm glad to have you here too as well. That intro right there for me was just flowing off my tongue because my audience knows, they know when people watch the Convo Couch, at the top of the list, and we care about a Green New Deal. We want Medicare for all. We want to end the regime change wars. We want prison reform, but you can't have any of that stuff unless you have clean, free, and more important, transparent elections. And that's what you're known as, a transparency advocate. So I am so happy that you're here with us today, John.
Well, thank you. You know, I always tell people that I used to be an election integrity activist. But after so many years, I realized there was very little integrity in the system, and I had to get over that. And I started seeing the solution. And I saw that solution when I first met Jim March in 2005, who worked with black box voting and who worked with Harry Hursty, who just came out in that new movie that's just out on HBO. And from there, we discussed what would this be the solution, because I was in the middle of a huge battle in Arizona, in Tucson, over a $2 billion bond election. And so that was a huge fight that I was into for 9 years. And then what got me really into realizing that this system could change is that a good friend of mine who worked with me, who was an NSA agent for 37 years, retired to Arizona, became a very good friend. And he was an expert on systems and how things could be manipulated. Mickey Donahoe was his name. And he taught me a lot and taught me that a logic and accuracy test only proves one thing, that the system's working right at this moment. And later I'll go into that, because I do want to explain, you know, why a logic and accuracy test is important, but why it's not good to use for audits, because they always claim when I go into a county, hey, we know the election results are good because we ran an audit. They ran a logic and accuracy, which is, what is it? It's test ballots going through a machine, and that they've predetermined what the numbers would be, and they're verifying the result. But it can be, what we would like to say is that an election day, it could do something totally different. Like on Easter, you got Easter eggs. Well, they could plant an Easter egg into the system, and a fraction magic program could open up and start changing all the results and make everything balanced really good, because this country is not very good at auditing. Yeah. Like I said, I go in there and they say, we know the results are good because we ran a logic and accuracy test. Yeah. And I turn to them and say, is that like that Volkswagen car that passed emissions 2 million times? That produced, it was 40 to 80% over the limit, not 40%. Yeah. Over the limit. It was 40 times over the limit. It was incredible that they passed it so many times. So, but anyway, back to you.
I just, you know, what you're talking about too is, I think we have to get this whole broad spectrum about, because we talk shop a lot of times, and it's not just one thing, you know what I'm saying? That's why I've always been attracted to you, because you're all about transparency across the board. You know what I'm saying? So whether it be an activist who says, oh, we want to have hand counted only, or one, we want to have open source, whatever the case may be, what I think you bring to the table is the fact that it's all about transparency, and that's important. And I think you'd also agree that we need to change our elections across the board. So when we're talking to people at the first time, it's just not one thing we can pinpoint. Am I accurate when I say that?
Oh, you're very accurate. And you know, I'm pleased to say that when I first got involved in this in 2004, there was not one state that was digital that created a ballot image. Okay. And if we maybe that's a good place, to start. I'm kind of going to the wrong computer here, is that if Jonathan went to slide 7 that he has, if he could
Got
pull
it.
that up, then, and I'm going to do that on mine too.
We'll have it here on this end.
Oops. Okay.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay, let me bring up slide 7, and then I need to switch out here. Okay, cut. And I'm going to, okay, I know what I'm going to do here.
So the gold standard in elections.
Okay, oh, good. That's where he's at right now.
It's already on the board, my friends.
Oh, good. Okay. Slide 7. Yes. The gold standard in elections, public hand counting, very, very important. I am an advocate for that. I would like to see a culture that would get us there back to being a precinct-based and hand counting. That has not happened in this country 40, 50 years. It does happen in a lot of other countries. If we go to the next slide, slide 8, I'd like to, it's very important because, these machines Americans use at the polls are less secure than an iPhone. And that was by some of the most famous scientists in the country, like Professor Apol. And in the next slide, you can see from DEF CON 3 years ago that anyone who says that these machines are unhackable is either a fool or a liar. This guy was who helped sponsor DEF CON 25 when it came to the voting village, and was able to get his hands on a lot of old equipment that just showed how vulnerable it was and proved that we were 100% right. Okay. But, the problems that we have in this country is that it's very hard to get a recount. Okay. Alabama, Arizona, Ohio, and many other states have problems with elections. Okay. You must have a court order. You got to prove fraud first before the court will let you access to the ballots. Without access to the original paper ballots, it's difficult to establish fraud.
Okay,
so
let me stop you real quick. So the two things that you're saying right off the bat, John. Number one, the machines are very hackable. Anybody can hack them. They're less secure than an iPhone. So, you know what I'm saying? They're easily hackable. That's number one. Number two, we don't have the proper audit system in process. Not only just the audit system, but the actual counting. You said they're not hand counted. I mean, at all? And you want to start what kind of culture?
They hand count a logic and accuracy test, and they think that proves everything is working right. But they just don't understand. And secondly, a lot of these people who run elections in these, let's just talk Michigan, because that's the last place I was. And I was up there with Steve Rosenfield, who's a well-known writer on election stuff. And they got VPN everywhere. I mean, me and Steve spent a couple days up there running around. We went from different municipalities. Michigan is a municipality-driven system, okay? And the county, what do? They buy the EMS, the election management system, and then they hire somebody to do the coding on building the system. And then they turn around and produce flashcards if you're Dominion, or if you're ES&S. They will give you thumb drives, and we'll go a little more into that later. And then they load them into a machine. Those cards are encrypted and secret. And then the municipality clerk, who runs a whole municipality, runs a logic and accuracy test. She gets some ballots, fills them out, goes in the test mode, runs them through the machine, and she says, oh, look, it works perfect. I know my results are good. But the reality is that on election day, that machine can kind of react totally different. And it can do it with such good accuracy that everything will balance out. If you have 999 voters, it has the capacity to make sure when it does the switch, because, Fraction Magic is a program that weighs your vote. Literally, I can say that you're going to get 1.25 fifths of a vote. And maybe this other person get 3/5. Okay.
Yeah. So what you're saying, though, John,
the numbers will balance.
So what you're saying, John, is that the election supervisors are buying these machines, getting these machines, and they're relying on the machines to do all the counting and whatnot. And they're encrypted. You said they're owned by a corporation, they're proprietary software.
By a middleman, a vendor, okay, or a subcontractor. And that's what the first thing I look for when I go into the state. Who is doing the coding? Who
Exactly.
runs the system? Where's the
Yes.
brain?
Yes. And we're
Everything
relying
is
on these
generated on the
companies.
EMS.
We're relying on these companies, and we should talk about them soon. These several companies that sell us these machines, that sell us these counting machines. We're relying all on their software, all on their programming, all on their coding, and we're not hand counting to make sure that it's accurate.
But we're running a logic and accuracy test.
Okay.
You know, and we know what Volkswagen did with theirs. They passed emissions 2 million times. Because what's the difference between an emission test and a logic and accuracy? What do they both do? It supposedly proves everything is working right. And clearly, in the Volkswagen instance, it was not.
Yeah. I remember
Okay,
the
it knew it
recall.
was
I
being
remember the
tested
recall.
because
Yeah.
the back wheels had a sensor built on them.
Yeah.
The steering wheel wasn't moving.
Yeah.
Okay. This was a very elaborate. This made them the world's largest car company. They bought Porsche. Okay. This thing was such a disaster in Europe that at the very end, everybody was cheating. And now they have 72,000 people dying prematurely because of the NOx gas that came out of these things.
Yeah.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yes. So we're saying these are fugazi results when it comes out with these tests. Fake. Fugazi is a
hell yeah. That's what it was. You know,
So-
it was, one thing I would say that anybody who wants to know more, I have this, and this right here is a report, and it goes into 16 years and a lot of hyperlinks to be able to help understand the Volkswagen story, why it's relevant to us, why we must have a good audit system to be able to go ahead and take away the impunity of a hacker. And that's what my program is about. Okay. I knew that in 2012 when Mickey Donahoe, that NSA guy, testified in Ohio working with Bob Petrakis. Okay. He got the judge convinced that a logic didn't mean nothing. They just loaded new data in before the machine, before the election. Remember when Karl Rove freaked out on Fox News in 2012?
Yep.
Okay. Well, that was because Ohio, somebody didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Okay. They were paranoid. Somebody took away their impunity to steal. And then the lawyer on the case was telling people, yeah, I got the feds, they're tapping phones. We know Karl Rove doing this and that. Bob Petrakis was involved in the case also that happened, I guess, in 2008, where they had a guy that they were deposing who was running the whole system in 2004, who rigged a lot of the system, who was murdered in an airplane crash. And they advised him not to fly his private airplane, not to do it. And it really kind of miffed their case. It really did. And,
all right.
It's quite a history if people were to look into it and realize that the mission that we must have, all of us, is to make elections, 1, transparent, 2, trackable. That means chain of custody. That's everything. And 3, publicly verified. And there are systems, and I'm hoping that, you and me will get to know each other better, and that, you could have Benny Smith on, who discovered fraction magic and really go into depth and help people what it is.
Yeah.
Also have Ray Lutz in San Diego, who's a close friend, who is inventing a computer program that will count these images.
Well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because
good, please.
Let's digress for a second and talk about what we got going on so far, what we just talked about. So now we have these machines, and they're hackable as can be. We are not into the business of publicly counting these ballots. So now the gateway for chicanery and shenanigans is open. Who are the people who make the majority of the machines in America, and who are the players in the game that we have to watch out for? Because it's interesting. You tell us about that first election in 2004 that you got involved in. At the end of that rainbow, when that election was fixed, there was somebody who made a lot of money, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's what elections are about, is money.
Okay. So who are the nefarious players in the game? Who are the sinister people?
In that particular election, it was developers. I always tell people Arizona and Florida have a lot in common. Okay. Yeah. One sold swampland, the other one sold desert.
Yeah.
Okay. It happened to be really gangsters. In Tucson, we had Bonanno retired here. The Purple Gang retired in Arizona into Tucson. Okay.
Yeah.
And then and also Florida. And so they started developing. There was all sorts of land scams, and they
Yes.
built these corporate communities,
Yeah.
and you know, they learned how to control. They passed laws that make it very hard. If you're an elected person on a board of supervisors, you really can't meet with your colleagues unless it's just if there's 5 people. If you get caught 3 together, that's a conspiracy. But there's got to be a way that they can get together and talk openly about problems and record it or whatever, because the people in behind the scenes. I mean, in Arizona, the big developer here was a guy named Donald Diamond. Okay, he had yachts in several oceans. Okay, he was just a mega developer. He owned part of the baseball team, the basketball team.
Yeah.
And
so in 2004, he was the one who was this the gentleman we're talking about, Mr. Diamond? And he had now.
well,
I want to
he was
explain
a special
something.
interest in the whole thing because he was the mega developer.
And this
they
wasn't
wanted infrastructure.
This wasn't an election for a candidate. This was an election for a certain law, right?
It was a bond election for $2 billion.
Okay. And
money.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, somebody went in, kind of tweaked the results for their favor for financial gain. So it's almost, it doesn't have to be for a candidate. We can fix elections for laws too as well, so certain people can get a certain outcome that they want, correct?
Exactly. And they had a hell of a scheme going. I mean, we were in that one really deep for 9 years that we saw the thing coming. I mean, on election night, I was very much awakened by the 2004 election. So this election was in May of 2006, shortly after the 2004 election, basically. And I was going precinct to precinct because I was investigating. I found all these machines breaking down. And that's because the guy who coded the system screwed it up.
Yeah.
And so
that's something we'll talk about too. They screw up these machines on purpose because that's part of the voter suppression, right?
Yeah, or sometimes through pure stupidity. Okay, that they didn't program it right, and then you send somebody downtown who was a legislator named Ted Downing, and he goes in there and calls me up and says, "John, they're frantic here. Something's wrong." And all I can see is that they're into a Microsoft Access manual. You know why that's important?
Why is that? Because Microsoft is owning it?
That was the database for the election system when it was in the Diebold system. It was Microsoft Access. How do you like that, huh?
Yeah. So
in fact, you can
talked
open
about
up the database in Microsoft Access and change anything you want.
Yeah, exactly. They got the keys to the kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
So Diebold is one. Who's the other one? Dominion. When it comes to our machines, who owns them?
Now, and the big one, and if we go to slide 13, we can kind of go into it. And 13 lays out the vendors. And the first one is election systems and software. They're about 45% of the market. Okay. Then you have Dominion, who, and this is kind of interesting, just to let you know, is that when Diebold sold their system, they used to be called Global, and what a crummy outfit they were out of Canada. And one of the guys who designed the system just got out of prison, and he was working, believe it or not, for some of the Watergate people back then. Okay, and incredible story that if you Google Diebold and in the beginning, you'll find it in my article, that document that I give out. So anyway, we caught them co-handed rigging the system, because when we finally got the databases, okay, we saw where this guy was taking the databases home and loading, and that he was printing the results on these elections, because eventually we got all the audit logs, that they would start counting 10 days out, and you could count on the first day. If they counted 30,000 votes, everybody knew who was going to win or lose 10 days ahead of time, because they were printing the results, which was illegal, because they started counting. Because it's pretty addictive to be able to know any given Sunday who's going to win all the goddamn football games.
Oh, yeah. As we go through this, there's a lot of techniques we could talk about. I know they're not supposed to start. They're not supposed to start counting in California until it's time to count. They're supposed to ready the machines, but we got wind that they were counting beforehand. And I explain to people all the time when it comes to voter suppression, and maybe you can verify this before we go into some more questions, but the early voting is always more moderate, to conservative. The later voting is always more liberal to progressive. So if you suppress the late vote, you suppress the progressive vote. Is that accurate for me to say that?
It is, because they purposely suppress it. And, I did a study in 2016 on California when it came to the presidential primary. And I know exactly how they do it in that election. Now, a lot of things have changed since then, but
Oh,
that was a stack, a strip, and a flip.
yes.
And basically this on election, first off, I was over in California 6 weeks earlier with Mimi Kennedy, Bob Petrakis, Harvey Wasserman, and others, discussing elections. We had a forum. And I was asked, since I was doing all of the primaries across the country, and then, of course, before that primary, I had sued my own state for basically the same thing, okay? But getting back to California, it was a stack, a strip, and a flip. Election night, I'm pushing around, getting all the counties, and I go, oh my God, Hillary's blown out Bernie by 26 points. It's all over.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And so I opened a bottle of wine. I got a little loaded. I got dinner. I woke up in the morning. She only won by 13 points, but only 65% of the vote was in.
I don't
And
want to go
learned at
too
the
much in that.
precinct-
That's a whole nother show. That's a whole
Oh,
show.
it is. I mean,
don't-
you're right. It's just
Don't tease me, because me and you,
Yeah.
we're going to do another
Thank
show.
you.
We're going to talk about 2016, because I
Good.
also talk about the suppression through provisional ballots and what we witnessed here in 2020. I'm going to release a small article about the voter suppression,
Good.
what they did on the front end. So let's save that for another show, because that's a good one.
Because it needs to go in depth into that.
We're going to go
that's
into
how
depth.
we learn.
Yeah.
But I want you to know there's all sorts of techniques. I mean, I would say this: the takeover that we see happening in the Democratic Party, we saw years ago that Mickey Donahoe identified it on the Republican side.
Yeah.
That's where they became more radicalized, because their system of elections was picked, not chosen by voters.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Democratic Party is that all the establishment Democrats think that they're morally entitled to win. So they don't give a shit about the rule of law. They don't care about fair elections. Since they think they're entitled to win, forget about it. They'll go through any means necessary to win. But while we're on the subject, tell my audience the difference between voter fraud and election fraud, or election rigging. Either way.
Okay, well, let's just go voter fraud. I mean, what is voter fraud? It is a very stupid myth that raises itself every 4 years. Okay, if there's some voter fraud going on, it's on a retail level. It's one vote at a time. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's retail. But when you talk about election fraud, okay, that's a different deal. Okay. Election fraud is done by insiders, vendors, subcontractors, insiders. Most fraud in this country is not done by Russians, okay? 80% of it is done by people who are in the inside system. That's how fraud happens. And by not having good chain of custody or security, these things can get way out of hand. And especially when that person doesn't have to be in the building, doesn't have to be in the county, doesn't even have to be in the state.
Yeah.
That is how severe if somebody is gaming the system. And, and I see this over and over, that in different states, that I always ask, who codes your system? Oh, we have so-and-so, this vendor, we can't give you his name or whatever. The one I found in Arizona had a corporation in 2004. He was doing this for quite a few years, but after the Help America Vote Act passed, he canceled his corporation, okay, and then became a DBA, doing business as.
Yeah.
Okay, and at one point, he was programming 13 out of 15 counties in my state, and he was loading the databases at that time through telephone phone modems. That was before the cellular craze went in, and the new systems now are using VPN, the virtual private network. And sometimes people have to ask themselves, what does virtual really mean?
Yeah,
Real
no shit.
or Memorex? I call it the insiders network.
Hmm.
A lot of states ban it. You don't have it in California. We don't have it in Arizona. But anyway, insiders are the key to the game, and there's a lot of them. These clerks, these election people, they're not geeky enough to be able to even understand how the system works, and they all live in groupthink land. And I want you to know, most of them are really good people. I want you to know that. I know a lot of election people because that's the career I've chosen the last 16 years. And I consider a lot of these people being hardworking, but they're totally misled. And they think that because they, like I said, run that logic and accuracy test, they know it's right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it
No,
may not be.
let's be honest. Those people, John, most of them, they're being fooled themselves. From all the way down to the leads and the poll places where we caught people a lead telling somebody, oh, the provisional ballot will count, because they were giving them provisional ballots because the printers were jammed. So here you got eligible Democratic voters getting provisional ballots that might not even be counted, and the leads telling them confidently it will be counted. But let me unpack some stuff real quick, because we're gonna get to some juicy parts right now. Because so it's established that we have these certain vendors who make the machines, not just the machines, but also the counting devices, which are separate, right?
Yeah, well, they make it all. I mean,
they make it all.
Put it this way, they all buy off-the-shelf hardware and modify it, some more than others. ES&S puts their own box around it, their own case, pays extra to have it modified, where, let's say, for example, Clear Ballot and Dominion, for their vote by mail, you can buy a $5,000 to $25,000 high-speed counter that takes, and it's just a digital scanner is all it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as that ballot goes in, it takes the picture, and then it lists the cast vote record. And then if everything's good, it will drop it in the box. Realistically, you know, I'm not a technophobe. I'm not scared of electronic voting. I'm scared of the people who run the damn system.
Yeah.
And I'm scared because we're not auditing, because somehow we think computers can add better than people. And guess what? They can. But they can cheat better than us too, because somebody is in the back playing the wizard, changing things.
And that's what I want to talk about.
Easy to dial these formulas in like fraction magic.
Yes. Before we get to fraction magic and the other thing, so what we do is, what I'm trying to establish is that we have contractors working that own all the equipment, own all the software, so the nefarious or the sinister people who want to change these things can use them as a front, that we can't look into things. We can't have transparency because it's owned by these people. So we have nefarious actors. We have outsourcing of our machines and our counting devices. And you just mentioned something, and I want to talk about it because this is how I learned about the Brakey method. I read about what happened in Alabama. So what you're saying is that in most of these machines, the counting machines, what they do is the machines, for instance, I heard there's the one we have over in California is I don't want to get into detail, but it's a Pitney Bow or what it is, but it's a machine that takes a picture of the ballot, a digitalized picture of the ballot, then shoots the ballot where and counts the image. Can you explain that and the Brakey method you talk about?
Slide, it'd be good if we went to slide 15, if Jonathan can pull that up.
Jonathan will pull up slide 15. Explain to us that in depth right now so we can get an understanding of how our elections go.
What's important to know is that, first off, before we talk about slide 15 and what it really means, is that the old system was a pure optical scanner. And what it was is that there was LED lights, and they had to print a ballot that was perfectly made off of an offset printer, and it went into the machine, the timing marks lined it up, then a light came down, and if there was a dark spot, it got absorbed, and that was your vote. Okay, that's what it determined. Left no evidence behind. Terrible system, I can tell you right now. Yeah, it was purely a black box. Okay, but with the new digital voting systems, this is what's exciting. There are two official versions of each ballot. The one the voter filled out, and the other the machine counted, and they're exactly the same. And we need redundancy. One is the original ballot you filled out, and the other one's the copy. The copy is a public record. Hey, folks, voting is a secret process. Counting is a public process.
Say that again. Say that again.
Go ahead.
I need you to say that again for me, because that's what is a private process? What is a public? Say it again, Mr. Brakey.
Voting is a secret process. Counting is a public process.
Okay. How many of these machines that we use take a picture and go through this method?
Oh, right now?
Yes.
If we don't go to vote by mail nationally, it's 80% right now.
Across the country.
Across the country.
So technically,
if we go vote by mail, which looks like that's going to happen, and that's why Trump is scared to death, and Republicans, they don't want to see that. But if it is, then we're going to be like 97% digital everywhere. Okay. And that means, hey, we want the copy of that ballot you counted, the digital. And
Yes.
then we want you to put the inkjet back in the machine. And we want you to make sure that it puts that unique identifying number on the ballot, which is an anonymous ballot, by the way. When it leaves your hands, it's anonymous. Okay. And it's put in the machine. And then that way we could get the images and then take a few and use a risk limiting audit system of some type to go back and verify that the images haven't been tampered, or vice versa. Anything can be gamed. Okay.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do know one thing. They're destroying these images. And me and Benny Smith is the man who found fraction magic. We both agree on one thing. Fraction magic can change the numbers on the fly,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
if you have VPN, the insider's network, but it cannot change the hand marked paper ballot.
Okay.
And it
Let me
cannot
get it.
change a
Yeah.
ballot image that's married to the hand marked paper ballot. So they must destroy the images,
Yes.
and they make ballots very hard to get to. Like I said, in Arizona, I can only get a recount if the results are within 1/10 of 1%. That's an anomaly. And by the way, it's only a machine recount.
Okay.
What did Einstein say? Doing something the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is a sign of insanity.
It's a sign. All right. So let me get this straight so my audience can understand this, John,
Yes.
because this is important now. You're saying that voting is a private,
Voting is a secret process.
a secret process. Counting is a public process. And you
That's
say
right.
80% of the machines across of America take a picture and so in other words, we own the rights, the public, to 80%, to see 80%, to audit 80% of the votes across America. True or false?
Absolutely. Or at least to make sure they're protected and then get to a judge. And it's going to take a good educational process, but I do know one thing is a fact. Destroying this stuff is against the law. You can't.
Yeah.
Okay? Because here's an analogy. Okay? Marijuana. If I'm a cop and I bust you with a pound of marijuana, okay? I tag it and bag it, and I give it to Jose. Jose gives it to Peter. Peter gives it to Mary Jane. Oh, she likes it. She breaks the bag open, and it takes most of it. Then she closes it back up, puts a different seal on it. It gets to court. The seal's been broken. The chain of custody has been violated. Case is tossed. It's contract law. It's federal law. If it's generated in the chain of custody, it must be preserved. These machines do not count the ballot. It counts the picture that it made. Am I making that clear?
You're making it very, very clear. And
Yeah,
and
so
I
you
also
can't.
want to make it clear to the audience too as well that there are other aspects of cheating too as well. Not just because in Florida, Brenda Snipes destroyed the actual physical ballots so they couldn't match up and audit properly the digital ballots. So,
Yes.
And also you talked about the chain of custody. There's a way to screw up the whole chain of custody. In California, we have 11 days now. It seems like it's 11 days they can mess with things before it even gets to the counting machine. So, I mean, I want everybody to be open and understanding, like, we're talking about the Brakey method, but what you said in the beginning, there's all these processes within the voting system that can be messed with. I mean, there's advocates what's the word? Advocates or activists, a transparency activist or election integrist activists who believe in certain areas is where we're getting hit. I know, and I don't want to talk too much about open source people because they believe that there's also ways that we have to be transparent within the software as well.
Right.
But I want to
agree
talk
with
about,
them. Yes.
and the reason why I wanted to have you on is because you're so great about this. You're about transparency, and that's your game. What is black box voting?
Oh my goodness, is that, I got a couple of slides that I think are very, very helpful. And I hope he gets those put up. And
We have them up.
slides 25, let's start slide 25.
25,
Okay?
we're on it.
25.
We're
And,
talking about the black box.
yeah. Why is a black box called a black box? Okay. In science, computing and engineering, a black box is a device system object which can be viewed in terms of input, output, and transfer characteristics without any knowledge of how the internal thing works. you can compare it to a human brain.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's some human brains out there. We don't want counting votes either. Okay. Unless there's people watching them count. Okay. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see that's what a black box is. We're trying to change that. And so on the next slide, the problem with the black box, machines are vulnerable to hacking. Well, that's nothing new. Use of secret software. Hey, that's what they do. Okay.
Yeah.
You cannot.
Can we talk about that? Can we
me?
talk about number 2 right there? Because the use of secret proprietary software. Aren't our elections publicly funded? And if they are publicly funded, why the hell do we have corporations that own our voting system? Can't we, the people, own this software?
You'd think so, huh? So somebody's working with them, because these companies, and and I'll say this, and ES&S may not like this, but you know what they are? They're a bunch of corporate hucksters. And I'm making a film about what they did in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Okay, the games that they play, how they claim that they don't pay money to campaigns or to people. No, they hire lobbyists who do that for them, is what they do. Okay, and they spent $500,000 getting the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania contract. The monies that they put out and how they do things and how they mislead people, it is a sad thing to watch how good people can be misled by corporate hucksters with a lot of money. And by the way, they're great at taking their elections directors, whining and dining them, flying them to Las Vegas for some convention and getting with them and saying, hey, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. They're a really interesting company. I want you to know they threatened to sue me about a year ago because I was running a collection of their owners' manuals and how the system worked. And they wanted me not to publish them or have them on my site. And they claimed, and we said to them, please sue us, because we are not stopping.
It's so funny too, because you have friends, and I've heard friends too as well. Some of the election advocates that we know, you talked about Ray Lutz has a machine that counts them and stuff. And I know open source people who have programs that say, it's completely open source. I've talked to the newer kids today, the hipsters, in some of them in Austin, Texas, and they have all this blockchain technology. And the thing is, when I talk to all sides, it's like, I want to incorporate everything, because these elections, we got to get them under control. If we don't get them under control, we have nothing. And you coming on today, establishing that there's corporations that own our elections, that, that there's no transparency, that there's these digital images that we, the people, own, but still don't get access to it. Our auditing process is out of whack. Our counting process is out of whack. We need to get this under control. It really is bad. You talked about the vote by mails. I did some investigating on the vote by mails. There's a lot of room, Mr. Brakey, I like to say, there's a lot of room for shenanigans going on over there. They send these to post office boxes where they abuse the chain of custody. They'll send one people to go pick it up. You don't even know who's on the other end of the P.O. box receiving these ballots. So there's a lot of really crappy shit out there that we got to fix. And one of the things we could talk about, too, because in California, Los Angeles in particular, we had ballot marking devices. Like, you get a ballot, you put it in, you mark the device, your ballot comes out, you make sure it's good, you put it back in. But out there, we had these things called DRE machines, right?
DREs, direct recording electronics.
No paper trail whatsoever. Can you explain these things? And this this is about what, 10%, 20% of the country right now?
What, DREs?
DREs. So what percentage?
The ballot marking devices are the replacement, and I would say that probably, I don't know, it's mostly going into right-wing areas. Tennessee, we're fighting them there.
DREs or
in Delaware? I mean,
we're talking about DREs, right?
What?
We're talking about DREs are going into these areas.
Well, no, we're talking about ballot, the son of the DRE. I'm quoting an ES&S guy, okay? The good son.
So ballot marking devices are the son? They're the son of the DREs?
That's what they call the ballot marking device, the son of the DRE, okay?
Yeah.
The good son.
But DREs have no paper trail.
Well, some do. They've got re-equipped, but even though we fought those back in 2006, because in 2004 they had nothing. And then by 2006, because the work of election activists all across the country, they We wanted them dumped. We no way to fix them. And then they came up with an idea to put a V-pack on it, which was a thermal piece of crap. And that's what it was.
Yeah.
And, even with that kind of stuff, all ballot marking devices or DREs bad because it takes away the human interaction with that ballot that shows you actually voter intent. The reality is people who vote on a ballot marking device after the machine prints out the card and gives it to them that may go into a digital scanner, nobody looks at it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the area too. This is an area though that where there is
3 out of 100 people.
Yeah. This is an area when we're talking about this particular issue right here where I see activists kind of split, election integrity activists, because a lot of times they say when you hand mark a ballot, that's room for discrepancy to throw it out. The old Florida rule with the hanging chads, where that's why they went to a ballot marking device, so there would be no discrepancy on what is actually marked. But, I mean, I think that's an area where I just want to point out where people always talk about, oh, well, it has to be marked by a machine. It has to be marked by hand. You'd rather have it that way. So I think that's something that we have to continue the talking on in the future. But here's something I want to get to real
quick.
Let me just
add to that before we go jumping onto something is that let's talk about the cost of this crap, okay? In North Carolina, there's 100 counties. 26 were thinking about, so they had DREs already. They had the old push and pray, iVotronics, which was really a bad machine. Terrible. It was thrown out of Florida in 2007 by Governor Christ, and they still had them there. So we went in there and fought them really hard, county to county. And when I ran the estimates, I want you to know, we're talking about millions of dollars in contracts, okay? And every $720 per thousand that in equipment they bought was to replace this, a pin, okay? Now, if it was a big pin, it might cost 8 cents.
Yeah,
okay? But they're selling these machines at $4,500. Okay? And then they tell you you're going to get your money back. And this is where the corporate hucksters come in and the lobbyists. The lobbyist says, hey, this ballot marking device doesn't even have software. Huh, what a lie. I wish I had that on tape. Okay? We only got that saying it to a friend of mine who works with me, Susan Pinchon out of Florida, who's my sister. Okay, we work very close together. When I'm on the road, she's tracking me constantly, making sure that I'm okay, and also giving me valuable information. And so that's part of the corporate hucksters that they've just created this massive machine. I fought them in Guilford County, and we won. They had a budget of $8 million to replace their voting system. The time I got done, they saved $5.8 million. They gave raises to people, the bus drivers who drive kids to school. Janitors, school teachers. Some schools are getting air conditioners. Okay.
Yeah.
What a great victory. And they're all now hand-marked paper ballots there, which is a good start, sense to work with. And I'll be back in North Carolina. If it wasn't for the virus, I'd be flying off to North Carolina probably tomorrow. But now, because of the virus, I'm stuck here. And that's why it's important for me to do your shows and get other people seeing what we're doing. And hopefully get the word out, do some online forums. And I'm hoping that y'all are going to be a very big help in that for what you're doing.
Well, we're going to try. And I tell you what, next time we do come on, we'll continue the conversation as far as ballot marking devices, hand devices. We'll bring up some stuff because, I did live through Florida where at that particular time, the hanging chad, it was a hand marking device. And a lot of older people, they said, didn't mark it right or whatever they said the reason was. And they discredited a lot of ballots. But I think the way they designed the ballot itself was meant to be confusing. That's how they did it that time. So, I mean, I'm open to talk more about this whole system.
They do that. And in 2018, I was in Broward County. I saw them steal the Senate race in Broward County because of ballot design.
Exactly.
The top of the ticket had 30,000 undervotes. That was the U.S. congressional federal race, okay? Then the next one was the House races federally, which there was 5 because that's a huge county. Timpcanoe was one of those. And then the governor's race only had 5,000 undervotes. What did the race decide by? It was 17,000. Listen, in my travels, Posh, what I've learned is that why does a bank robber rob a bank? Because that's where the money is. Why do they rob Broward County? Why do they rob communities of color? Because they can count on suppressing 70% of the vote there is going to be Democrat. So if they damage 10 people, 3 Republicans, they're still ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those are the areas that are very vulnerable, because that's where the best place to steal. Plus the numbers are huge. And over the years, working, like you said, with Mickey Donahoe, he discovered algorithms that the larger the precinct got, the more they would steal. But if it was small, they wouldn't do anything. You see what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
you could follow the size right across the board. We caught this algorithm back in 2008 and 10 on the Republican side. And then all of a sudden it started showing up on the Democratic side. We saw it very heavily in 2016. Like I said, I was all over the country doing primaries. I did Massachusetts 3 times. Bernie Sanders in Massachusetts lost the whole state by 1.42%. But I knew, because I was there for the Brown election, that 68 to 72 of these municipalities, because they're a municipality-driven system of 351 municipalities, that 68 of them hand counted. He won that by 17.9%. It was 2% of the state vote. I think that's a pretty good indicator that there's a problem, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't win one college town.
Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
here's what I got right now. We're going to wrap up this interview, but let me ask this last question.
Good.
Right now we have a petition going around. Tim Canova's floating it. It's
Yeah.
about we the people, American people, demand paper ballots in November 2020 federal election. He's also talking for, because this is the important thing, he's not just asking for hand-counted hand ballots, paper ballots. He's asking for hand-marked paper ballots that are counted by hand in public by we, the American people. What could people do, in your mind, John, to start getting rolling on this whole bus for election integrity? What could we, the people, do? People watching this show today, and as they rewatch this video, what is your piece of advice for them to go out and do?
My piece of advice for them is to study the subject, start working towards solution. Remember, transparency is what we're working for. And if we can get hand counting, so be it. I mean, hey, I would say this: democracy is on the ballot this year, okay? Let's put it this way. In 2016, if not voting for president was a presidential candidate, they would have won by a landslide, okay? This is a very severe problem. Cynicism. We need to prove to the American people that elections are real. And also, we need to give the system a tetanus shot against what? Hackers. Take away their impunity, okay? How we do that? By getting the images or hand counting. That's going to be harder to do, because that means the government's going to have to hire people and do that. These ballot images, well, we want them, and then we want the right to take images using risk limiting audits and go back and compare them to the original. That way, we're just not counting one race. We count everything.
Yeah.
And you start at a precinct level. Does that make sense?
It makes 100% sense.
Right.
I mean, I would just add to that too, is I want to take away any corporate owning or of software whatsoever. If it's an election that's owned by the people, the software needs to be owned by the people as well. So we own the digital images, we own the software, we own everything, and we have to spend that money right. All that money that goes out to all these vendors and whatnot, it's being wasted where we can use it, and we the people, and get way more accurate counts of our elections. That's my opinion.
Well, I'm with you. And I would say this: if something for people to do, and I'll send you something on it. There's a group that formed out of San Francisco by Emily Levy called Scrutineers. I am an election scrutineer, and we need to have a lot of scrutineers that understand the process and how to tackle it, and to approach this problem. They need to learn the 7 C's of what we do: character, capacity, credibility, civility. Hey, I can call you bad names real nicely with civility,
Yeah.
Citizenship, that's all right. This is our country. That's the other C. But the big C is to be courageous and stand up. And sometimes you got to do that by yourself. And I advise people not to try to get into big groups. Form small groups. Think like Margaret Mead. What did Margaret Mead say? A few committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing it ever has. And I swear to God, if we form a committee, we're screwed, okay? Like-minded people working together, who have love in their heart is an important part, because when you have bitterness in your heart, you make bad decisions. Okay.
Yeah.
We have to hold our civility, because that's what they would like to exploit us and get us out of the picture, is by doing things that are stupid that get us nowhere. And so with that, scrutineers, I'll provide you the link that maybe we can put on this video. And she's somebody else that you should have on the show, because she's an extremely talented teacher and she's built a hell of a site.
Yeah. Well, we'll get her in the queue, but we got more discussions down in the future. This interview might be over, but 2016 California, 2020 Michigan, those are the two interviews we talked about we want to have coming up. Fiorella's going to get on here and talk to you about them as well. Jonny Tsu, you got anything else before we get out of here?
Well, just that we are in Florida and we're getting ready to file a suit there again. We'll have a very surprise to who the plaintiffs are going to be. We're excited about it. I can't release that now. Michigan, we're waiting to hear from the Secretary of State's office how they could tell us that saving ballot images could cause long lines. We're waiting for a response. Okay. And also in Michigan, I'm looking to find out where Detroit hid their EMS. Incredible story when we get to that one. But I thank you for having me on. And I look forward to doing more shows with you and helping people understand, because surely it's better to understand than be understood.
You just took my line away. I was going to quote that there. That was the first video I saw of you. You said it. Yeah. Well, let me just say this, Mr. John Robert Brakey. You're a hell of a scrutineer, and I'm thank you for coming on my show. We got more discussions to come. I think it was a great first 101 transparency video. Thank you so much, John Brakey.
Thank you very much, Bosch.
For Pasta Jardula, Jonny Tsu on the ones and twos. This was Convo Discussions with John Brakey. We'll speak to you later. Convo out.